February 14th, 1944, just after dawn. 22,000 feet above the Bismarck Sea, east of Rabaul. The air is thin, cold, and vibrating with engine noise. Sunlight flashes off canopies and wings as a formation of American fighters cuts through scattered cloud, their dark blue skins almost black against the pale morning sky. Inside one of them, a young U.S. Navy lieutenant tightens his grip on the control stick and scans the horizon. Below him lies Rabaul, Japan's fortress in the South Pacific. Smoke already rises from the harbor, a permanent scar from months of bombing. Anti-aircraft fire is waking up, black puffs blossoming lazily in the distance. Somewhere out there, he knows, the enemy is climbing to meet them. And the enemy believes something with near religious certainty. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero cannot be beaten. For nearly 3 years, that belief has ruled the skies of the Pacific. Back in December 1941, when Japanese carrier aircraft screamed down over Pearl Harbor, the Zero announced itself as a weapon from the future. It could outclimb, outturn, and outfight anything the Americans had. Its pilots, men like Saburo Sakai, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, and Shigeru Itaya, cut through Allied formations with terrifying ease. They fought an aircraft so light, so responsive, that it felt like an extension of their own bodies. American pilots learned the truth the hard way. Over the Philippines, over Wake Island, over the Java Sea. Wildcat fighters tried to turn with Zeros, and died for it. One tight turn, one moment of instinctive dogfighting, and a Zero would slide onto their tail like a predator. Cannon shells would tear fabric and aluminum apart. Men burned, spiraled, vanished into the ocean. By 1942, the Zero had earned a reputation that bordered on myth. Japanese pilots spoke of it as invincible. Allied intelligence reports described it with a kind of fearful respect. Some U.S. pilots swore the Zero could hover or climb straight up like an elevator. And in a sense, they weren't wrong. The Zero was light because it sacrificed protection. No armor plate, no self-sealing fuel tanks. It was designed for range, maneuverability, and the offensive spirit of the Imperial Japanese Navy. In the hands of a skilled pilot, it was lethal. And early in the war, nearly all Japanese naval aviators were skilled. Veterans of China, trained for years in a brutally selective system. Against that, the Americans were improvising, learning, bleeding. But now it is 1944, and the aircraft slicing through the sky above Rabaul is not a Wildcat. It is an F4U Corsair. The Corsair is a monster compared to the Zero. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine roars with over 2,000 horsepower, swinging the largest propeller ever fitted to a single-engine fighter. Its inverted gull wings bend sharply downward and then up again, a shape so distinctive it looks almost aggressive even at rest. Japanese pilots have a nickname for it: the Whistling Death. When it dives, air screams through openings in the wings, producing a shrill howl that echoes across the sky and into the gut. Inside the cockpit, the Corsair pilot feels the vibration through the seat, through his boots, through his spine. He checks his airspeed, checks his altitude. He does not look down at the enemy airfield yet. Instead, he looks up and out, because that is where the Zero will come from. On the Japanese side, at Lakunai Airfield near Rabaul, engines are already turning. Ground crews scatter as Zeros roll forward, their pale gray-green wings catching the light. Canopies slide shut, harnesses are pulled tight. A red sun gleams on the fuselage. These pilots are not afraid. They have beaten the Americans before, many times. They know the Corsair is fast, they know it dives well, but they also know, or believe, that once the fight slows down, once it turns into a twisting, turning dogfight, the Zero will still reign supreme. That belief shapes everything. The Japanese fighters climb hard, spiraling upward, positioning themselves above the incoming Americans. From altitude comes advantage. From altitude comes control. From altitude comes death. The Corsairs hold formation, climbing steadily, their engines pushing them higher and faster than earlier American fighters ever could. The pilots have been drilled relentlessly. Do not turn with a Zero. Use speed. Use vertical space. Hit hard. Break away. This is not the war of 1942 anymore. As the two groups close, sunlight flashes off canopies. Tiny black specks become aircraft. Aircraft become enemies. A Zero rolls onto its back and dives. The Corsair pilot sees it instantly. Just a glint at first. Then the unmistakable shape of long wings and rounded tips. He feels his pulse spike, but his hands stay steady. He pushes the nose down slightly, building speed. This will not be a turning fight. The old rules are about to die. The Zero dives like a falcon, its nose pointed straight at the American formation. Tracers streak past the Corsair's canopy, thin white lines snapping through empty air. The Japanese pilot expects the familiar response. Panic, a hard turn, a desperate attempt to evade. Instead, the Corsair does something unexpected. It dives with him. The American pilot shoves the throttle forward until it hits the stop. The engine roars louder, deeper, the vibration turning violent as speed builds. The Corsair accelerates brutally, faster than instinct says is safe. The Zero, light and agile, starts strong, but then the balance shifts. The distance between them doesn't close. It widens. The Japanese pilot blinks, instinctively pulling harder, trying to keep the American fighter in his sights. The Zero begins to shudder. Its controls grow heavy as speed climbs. This is not where it was meant to live. The Corsair keeps going, 600 kilometers per hour, then more. The American pilot feels the aircraft settle, stable and rock solid, like it's riding on rails. He doesn't yank the stick. He doesn't turn. He waits. This is what they were trained for. Boom and zoom. Speed is life. Altitude is currency. And at the bottom of the dive, he pulls up sharply, trading velocity for height. The G-forces crush him into his seat. His vision narrows, darkening at the edges. But the Corsair responds, climbing like an elevator. The Zero cannot follow. The Japanese pilot tries. He hauls back on the stick, nose pitching up, but the Zero bleeds speed instantly. The climb turns mushy. The controls feel soft. For a heartbeat, the aircraft hangs, weightless, exposed. And that is when the Corsair rolls over the top. The American pilot flips his fighter inverted and drops straight down, lining up the Zero in his gun sight. He squeezes the trigger. 6 50-caliber machine guns erupt at once. The cockpit fills with vibration and noise as streams of tracer rounds tear downward. They rip into the Zero's wings, fuselage, engine cowling. Fuel sprays like mist. Smoke erupts from the nose. The Zero snaps into a violent roll. A second later, it's gone, falling, spinning, disappearing into cloud and sea. There is no time to watch. The sky has exploded into chaos. Across the battle space, Corsairs and Zeros slash past one another in vertical arcs. The Japanese pilots try to slow the fight, pulling into tight horizontal turns, attempting to drag the Americans into the kind of close-in dogfighting that made the Zero famous. But the Corsairs refuse. They dive through, fire once, and climb away, over and over again. Each pass is calculated. Each attack is brief and violent. The Corsairs' pilots are disciplined. No chasing, no turning, no lingering. If a shot doesn't kill, they break off immediately, using speed to escape. Japanese pilots begin to realize something is wrong. The Corsair isn't playing by the old rules. A Zero latches onto the tail of one American fighter, its pilot grinning inside his oxygen mask. Now, he thinks, this is where the Zero lives. He tightens the turn, closing the distance. But the Corsair doesn't try to outturn him. It drops its nose and dives straight down. The Zero follows and immediately starts losing ground. The Corsair accelerates faster, pulling away. The American pilot counts silently, then pulls up into a climbing spiral. The Zero tries to match the move. It stalls. The Japanese fighter shudders, wing dropping as airflow separates. The Corsair snaps around at the top of the climb and fires a burst into the helpless aircraft. It explodes midair, fragments tumbling in all directions. Below, the harbor defenses keep firing, but they can't track the speed. Black Flag bursts hang uselessly behind the action. The fight is too fast, too vertical. The Japanese formation begins to fracture. Years of doctrine are failing in real time. The Zero was built for a different kind of war, one where dogfighting meant turning tighter than your enemy, where courage and finesse decided the outcome. But this enemy refuses to turn. He hits and vanishes, strikes from above, then disappears into the sun. Inside their cockpits, Japanese pilots feel something unfamiliar creeping in. Doubt. They radio warnings. They shout to one another to stay high, to avoid the dives. But instinct is hard to kill, and training runs deep. Every time a Corsair streaks past, the temptation to follow is overwhelming. And every time they do, another Zero dies. The American pilots can feel the shift. What once felt like survival now feels like control. The Corsair responds to every input with power. It shrugs off damage that would have shredded earlier fighters. Rounds strike its armor plating and bounce away. Fuel tanks seal themselves instead of erupting. This airplane forgives mistakes. The Zero does not. By the time the Corsairs break away and head back toward their carriers, the sky over Rabaul is littered with falling wreckage. Smoke columns rise from the sea. Parachutes drift slowly downward. The myth has cracked, and it will never fully recover. The survivors limp back toward Rabaul, engines coughing, wings scarred, minds racing. For the first time in years, Japanese pilots land with more questions than answers. On the ground, mechanics rush forward, counting aircraft, scanning for familiar faces that never appear. Helmets are pulled off, oxygen masks dropped. Voices are low, eyes avoid one another. Something has changed. For the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service, the Zero was never just a machine, it was a symbol. It embodied the belief that spirit, skill, and maneuverability could overcome brute force. That belief had been validated again and again in 1941 and 1942. But the Corsair represents something different. Industrial power, survivability, speed, an enemy that learns. American pilots gather in debriefing rooms aboard carriers and island airstrips, sweat-soaked and grinning with the quiet satisfaction of men who lived. They sketch diagrams on chalkboards, vertical climbs, high-speed dives, firing windows measured in seconds. Never turn with them, one pilot repeats. Make them follow you down, another adds. And if they climb, kill them. These lessons spread fast. By early 1944, Corsair squadrons are operating across the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, and eventually the Philippines. The aircraft's reputation grows with every engagement. Japanese pilots learn to fear its silhouette, long nose, bent wings, relentless speed. But fear alone cannot compensate for reality. The Zero is no longer evolving. Japan's aircraft industry is strained to the breaking point. Raw materials are scarce, engines wear out. Replacement pilots arrive with fewer flight hours, rush through abbreviated training programs. The elite cadre that once dominated the skies is thinning, killed, wounded, or grounded. Meanwhile, American pilots arrive with hundreds of training hours, backed by an industrial machine that produces Corsairs by the thousands. And the Corsair keeps getting better. New variants arrive with more powerful engines, better visibility, and improved weapons. Rocket rails appear beneath the wings. Bomb racks follow. The Corsair is no longer just a fighter. It's a predator that hunts everything below. Japanese pilots try new tactics. They attempt head-on attacks, hoping to exploit the Zero's lightness and frontal profile. But the Corsair's armor shrugs off glancing hits, and 6 heavy machine guns speak louder than 2 cannons. Others try ambushes from cloud cover, diving once and breaking away. But speed betrays them. Once spotted, the Corsair can choose when and whether to engage. The balance of power has shifted decisively. There is a moment, described in post-war interviews, when a veteran Japanese pilot watches a Corsair climb past him after a failed attack. He knows instantly that he cannot catch it. He pulls away, disengages, and survives. That decision, to disengage, would have been unthinkable in 1942. The myth of invincibility is gone. By the time American forces push toward the Marianas, the Corsair is everywhere. Over Saipan, over Guam, over Iwo Jima. Marines on the ground look up and see dark shapes diving almost vertically, rockets screaming, guns flashing. They hear the whistle before they see the aircraft. Whistling death becomes a promise. For Japanese pilots still flying the Zero, the war has become something grim and defensive. No longer hunters, they are interceptors, scrambling to meet overwhelming numbers. They fight bravely, often skillfully, but the outcome is increasingly predictable. Speed wins, altitude wins, survivability wins. The Corsair doesn't need to outturn the Zero, it just needs to outthink it. And that, perhaps more than anything, is what truly ends the Zero's reign. Not a single dogfight, not a single battle, but the realization that the enemy has learned how to fight without playing your game. As the Pacific War grinds on, the sky fills with newer American fighters, the Hellcat, the Mustang, but the Corsair remains, brutal and unmistakable, a reminder of the moment when the balance tipped, when belief met reality, and reality won. By mid-1944, the sky over the Pacific no longer feels the same. For American pilots, there is confidence now, hard-earned and disciplined. They climb knowing they have the advantage. They enter combat expecting to survive. That alone marks a turning point in the air war. For Japanese pilots, every scramble carries a weight it never did before. The Zero still climbs quickly. It still turns beautifully. But its weaknesses are no longer theoretical. They are known, exploited, and lethal. Every engagement with a Corsair is a calculation. Do I fight or do I die? Many still fight. Over the Philippine Sea, Zeros rise to meet waves of American aircraft so vast they darken the horizon. Corsairs and Hellcats slice through them like scythes. Japanese pilots try to coordinate, to regain altitude, to draw Americans into turning battles, but the Americans refuse. The result becomes known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. From the cockpit of a Corsair, the battle feels almost unreal. Targets appear faster than they can be engaged. Zeros cross the gun sight, explode, vanish. The radio is alive with calm, clipped voices calling out kills, positions, fuel states. This is not arrogance. This is mastery. Down below, Japanese carriers burn. Air groups are wiped out in a single day. Decades of training doctrine collapse in hours. The Zero, once the blade of Japanese naval power, is now a relic fighting a future it cannot touch. Yet the Corsair's story does not end in clean victories alone. The aircraft itself is unforgiving. Early on, it earned a reputation as a widowmaker during carrier landings. Its long nose blocks forward visibility, its landing gears stiff, bouncing pilots back into the air if they misjudge even slightly. Many Corsair pilots die without ever seeing an enemy. But those who master it become something else entirely. They learn to trust its strength, to push it past limits that would tear other fighters apart, to dive faster, climb harder, and absorb punishment that would kill a Zero pilot instantly. The Corsair is not elegant, it is ruthless. As the war nears its final phase, Japanese aviation reaches a breaking point. Fuel shortages ground aircraft. Experienced pilots are gone. New pilots are sent aloft with minimal training, sometimes knowing they will not return. The Zero, stripped of its aura, is pressed into new roles. Some are loaded with bombs for suicide missions. Others fly with outdated tactics against overwhelming odds. Against them, Corsairs continue to hunt. There are moments, brief, tragic, when a Zero still scores a victory, when skill and luck align. But they are exceptions now, not the rule. The sky belongs to the Americans. When Japan finally surrenders in August 1945, wrecked Zeros litter airfields across the Pacific. Their frames are light, their armor thin, their legend broken. Corsairs, by contrast, remain in service for years. They fly in Korea. They are remembered by the men who flew them not as graceful machines, but as ones that brought them home. The Zero was never truly untouchable. It was simply ahead of its time, until time caught up. And when it did, it was the Corsair, screaming out of the sun, that proved the sky no longer cared about myths.